I always thought mirrors only showed what stood in front of them, until one night, my reflection smiled back at me when I didn't. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a story about fear. It was about something learning how to become me. It started on the night I still remember with disturbing clarity. The kind of night where the silence feels heavier than sound, and the air inside the room seems to watch you back. Because around 2:11 a.m., when the power went out and my room was lit only by the weak glow of my phone screen, I walked toward the mirror, fixed to my wardrobe out of pure habit, expecting nothing more than my tired face staring back at me. But the moment I raised my hand to rub my eyes, I noticed something was wrong because my reflection hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, like it needed time to decide whether to copy me or not. And before I could convince myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, I lowered my hand and watched in disbelief as the reflection's hand remained raised, fingers slightly bent, trembling as if it was alive and nervous, and my heart began pounding so loudly that I was sure it could be heard through the walls. Yet I stood frozen, staring straight into my own eyes in the mirror while the thing that looked like me slowly tilted its head to the side in a way I had done, its lips stretching into a slow, unnatural smile that showed too many teeth. A smile that didn't belong to me. A smile that felt deliberate, mocking, almost proud. And when I stumbled back in fear, the reflection stepped forward, pressing its palm against the glass from the other side as if the mirror were only a thin barrier separating us. And I remember whispering this ISNT under my breath while my reflection silently mouthed the same words a second later. Not in sync, but as if it were repeating me, learning me, studying me. And then, without any warning, its smile widened into something twisted, something cruel, the corners of its mouth stretching farther than humanly possible, its eyes darkening until the whites faded away, leaving behind a hollow, bottomless stare that made my stomach drop because that was the moment I realized this thing wasn't copying me anymore. It was performing, and as I slowly backed away until my shoulders hit the wall, the reflection leaned closer to the glass, fog forming where it breathed, and I could have sworn I heard a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the inside of the mirror. And even when I shut my eyes tightly and counted to 10, hoping the nightmare would disappear, the scratching didn't stop. It only grew louder, more impatient, as if whatever lived behind that reflection was tired of waiting for permission to come out. And when I forced my eyes open again, my reflection was no longer pressed against the glass but standing a step back, watching me with that same devilish smile. Its head straight now, posture confident, almost relaxed, as if it knew something I didn't. And that was when I noticed its shadow didn't match mine. Because while my room's dim light casts my shadow slightly to the left, the shadow inside the mirror fell in the opposite direction, crawling up the wall behind the reflection like a living stain. And before I could process that impossible detail, the reflection lifted its hand again, not mirroring me but slowly waving. A taunting gesture that made my throat go dry, and then its lips moved without sound, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. I've waited long enough, and the mirror began to vibrate lightly, the glass humming as thin cracks appeared like veins spreading across its surface. And with every crack, my reflection's smile grew wider, its eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt like fingers digging into my brain, pulling memories, fears, secrets, things I had never spoken aloud. And suddenly the room felt smaller, the walls inching closer, while the mirror felt closer than ever, breathing, pulsing, alive. And when I turned my head for just a second to reach for my phone on the bed, the sound of glass creaking echoed behind me, followed by a wet, unnatural chuckle. And when I slowly turned back, my reflection was no longer alone, because behind it, standing in the darkness of the mirrored room, were other shapes, distorted versions of faces pressed against the glass from the inside, all smiling the same smile, all watching me like I was the last open door left in a locked house. And that was when the reflection leaned forward again and pressed its forehead against the mirror, its voice finally escaping in a low whisper that came from everywhere at once, saying my name in the exact tone my mother used when I was a child. And I realized with a sick certainty that whatever was inside that mirror didn't just want to look like me anymore. It wanted to live where I was standing, and it was only waiting for the moment I blinked, breathed wrong, or dared to believe I was alone. And the moment that whisper said my name, the room temperature dropped so fast my breath turned visible, fog curling from my mouth, while inside the mirror the reflection breathed normally, calmly, as if the cold belonged only to me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to look away. The kind of instinct your body uses to escape danger before the mind can argue. But something held my eyes locked to that glass, as though invisible hooks were buried behind them. And then the reflection lifted its finger and tapped the mirror once. A soft, deliberate knock that echoed far louder than it should have, followed by another and another, each tap sending a vibration through the floor beneath my feet, until I noticed faint cracks appearing on my side of the mirror now, spreading outward from where it touched, and the reflection smiled even wider, its teeth lengthening, sharpening, stretching into something not meant for a human mouth, and it spoke again, this time clearly, its voice sounding exactly like mine but layered with something older underneath, something rough and amused, saying, "You've been borrowing this life long enough." And before I could scream, the mirror suddenly went completely dark, like a screen switched off, plunging the room into silence so absolute my ears rang, and in that silence I felt a presence behind me, not reflected, not imagined, but heavy and close, breathing slowly against the back of my neck. And I knew without turning around that if I moved, if I acknowledged it, something irreversible would happen. Yet the mirror flickered back on by itself, and what I saw made my knees weaken, because now the reflection was standing in my room, on my side of the glass, while inside the mirror was an empty space where I should have been, and the thing wearing my face adjusted its posture, rolled its shoulders like someone settling into new clothes, and gave me a slow, satisfied nod, as if to say the hardest part was finally over. And as it nodded, I realized with a surge of panic that my reflection-s eyes were no longer just copying mine but actively searching my face, studying every twitch and breath. And when it took its first step toward me, the sound of its foot hitting the floor was wrong. Heavier, wetter, like flesh learning gravity for the first time. And I backed away instinctively until my legs hit the bed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep myself upright, while the thing that looked like me tilted its head again, amused, and asked in a calm voice why I looked so surprised when this was something I had been doing my whole life without realizing it. And before I could ask what it meant, the mirror behind it began to change, no longer reflecting the room but showing moments from my past. Scenes I had buried deep, times I had stood in front of mirrors late at night hating myself, whispering things I never told anyone, moments where I wished I could disappear or be someone else. And with each memory, the creature's smile softened into something almost grateful, as if those thoughts had fed it, shaped it, given it permission to exist. And it stepped closer until I could see faint cracks running across its skin like broken glass, light leaking out from beneath. And it reached out and grabbed my wrist, its grip ice cold, yet painfully strong, pulling me toward the mirror while whispering that reflections are not created by light alone, but by attention, by obsession, by the parts of us we stare at too long. And as my fingers touched the glass, it felt warm and soft, like skin stretched thin, and the mirror began to ripple, pulling at me like a slow current. And I heard voices again from the other side, dozens of team all sounding like me at different ages, laughing, begging, warning, and the thing tightened its grip and leaned in close enough for me to smell something metallic on its breath, as it told me there was room for only one of us in the real world. And the choice had already been made the first time I looked into the mirror and believed it was empty. And as those voices overlapped inside my head, I felt my body growing lighter, thinner, like my weight was being drained into the glass, while the thing holding my wrist grew more solid with every second, its grip warming as if blood was finally learning how to flow through it. And I tried to pull back, but the thing that used to be my reflection only smiled with that same devilish satisfaction, telling me in a soft, almost kind voice that this part always hurts the most. And the mirror behind us opened wider, stretching like a doorway made of liquid shadow, revealing a version of my room that felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain, where the angles were sharper, the darkness deeper, and countless mirrors lined the walls, each one containing a different version of me staring back in silence, all of them smiling, all of them waiting. And as I was dragged closer, I realized those versions weren't trapped. They were settled, comfortable, like prisoners who had stopped hoping for escape. And suddenly I understood why the mirror in my room had always felt like it was watching me even when I was NT looking. Why I sometimes caught my reflection, smiling for just a moment too long, because this place had been slowly collecting pieces of me over years, fragments of doubt, anger, loneliness, feeding something patient and clever. And when my feet finally left the floor and the glass swallowed me up to my knees, the creature leaned close and whispered that no one would notice the difference, that it would laugh like me, talk like me, live my life better than I ever had, while I would finally get the peace of stillness. And as the surface of the mirror closed around my waist like cold water, I saw, for the last time, my room from the outside as the thing stepped fully into my place, straightened my clothes, wiped the fear from its face with a casual hand, and glanced back at the mirror to meet my eyes, raising a finger to its lips in a silent warning. Because even now, as I'm being pulled deeper into that endless reflected world, surrounded by smiling versions of myself, I can feel it looking at the mirror sometimes, checking to see if I'm still watching, still awake, still waiting for the moment it slips, because reflections never truly die, they only learn to wait. And in that waiting, time stopped behaving the way it does in the real world, because moments stretched into something thick and endless while I was dragged fully inside, the mirror sealing behind me with a soft, suffocating sound like skin closing over a wound. And suddenly I was standing on a cold floor that reflected everything yet showed nothing true, surrounded by countless mirrors facing one another, creating infinite corridors of my own face repeating into darkness, each version slightly different. Some older, some younger, some bruised, some smiling too wide, and they all watched me with the same knowing expression, as if they remembered becoming what they were. And I realized with a sick certainty that every reflection here had once been someone real, someone who stared too long, doubted too deeply, hated themselves just enough to be noticed. And when I tried to scream, the sound didn't leave my mouth, but echoed inside my skull, bouncing between the mirrors until it dissolved into laughter that wasn't mine. And somewhere far above, like sound traveling through deep water, I heard my own voice laughing in my room, leaving my life, while one of the reflections stepped forward and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, telling me not to struggle because struggling only makes them stronger, explaining in a calm, rehearsed tone that the real world feeds on certainty, but this place feeds on fear, and fear is something humans never run out of. And as I looked closer at the mirrors, I noticed faint handprints pressed from the inside, scratches clawed deep into the glass, dates and names carved in desperation, some so old they had almost faded away. And that was when the most terrifying realization settled in my chest. Because none of those names belonged to strangers. They were all variations of mine. Spelling mistakes, nicknames, childhood versions, future versions that never got to exist. And I understood then that this wasn't just a prison but a cycle, a harvest. And as the reflections slowly closed in around me, their smiles gentle and patient, I felt something inside me beginning to fade. Not my body, but my sense of being real. And somewhere beyond the glass, in my room, the thing wearing my face glanced at the mirror again, just for a second too long, smiling faintly as if it could still hear me. As if it knew that one day, when it grows tired of pretending, it will stand in front of another mirror and hesitate, just long enough for me to start moving on my own. And that hesitation, I could feel it like a distant pulse, a crack in the certainty of the thing living my life. And every time it doubted itself even for a heartbeat, the mirrors around me shivered, sending ripples through the endless corridor, and the other reflections would turn their heads in unison, listening, hopeful, in a quiet, desperate way. Because doubt was the only currency that mattered here. And I learned quickly that time moved differently depending on how afraid you were. Seconds stretching into years when panic took hold, collapsing into nothing when numbness crept in. And I began to notice small changes in the mirrors closest to me. Tiny delays when they copied my movements. Slight imperfections in the smiles, as if the rules were loosening. And one reflection whispered that the one wearing my face was slipping, that pretending to be human required effort, restraint, and the longer it stayed, the more it risked, remembering what it truly was. And through one particular mirror I started seeing flashes of my real world, my hands moving without thought, my voice answering friends, laughing at the right moments, but sometimes pausing in front of reflective surfaces just a second too long. Eyes darkening, lips curling into that familiar devil smile before it caught itself. And every time that happened, the mirrors around me hummed softly, encouraging, hungry, and I realized with a slow, terrifying clarity that the thing hadn't escaped alone. It was connected to this place, tethered, feeding it pieces of my life, my experiences, my emotions, and as those pieces drained away, I felt myself growing sharper, more focused, less human, but more aware. Until one day I reached out and touched the mirror again, and this time it resisted me, pushing back like two magnets pressed together, and the reflection stepped away, watching closely, because something new was happening, something they hadn't seen in a long time. And for the first time since being trapped, I smiled not out of fear, but recognition, because I finally understood the rule that never wanted me to learn, that a reflection can only replace you if you believe it deserves to exist more than you do. And once that understanding settled in my mind, the mirrors reacted violently, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water, the reflections hissing softly as if a secret had been spoken aloud. And I felt a pressure in my chest ease for the first time since being pulled inside. Because belief here wasn't passive, it was physical, heavy, something that bent the space around you. And as I stood my ground and stared back at the nearest version of myself, its smile faltered, hoosed a little, its eyes darting away like it was afraid to meet my gaze too long. And beyond it I saw the real world again, clearer now. The thing wetting my face, standing in a bathroom somewhere unfamiliar, hands gripping the sink, breathing hard. Its reflection in that mirror, lagging a fraction of a second behind, just like it once had for me. And I felt a grim satisfaction twist through me as the roles began to blur. Because doubt was finally blooming inside it, spreading like a crack through glass. And with every uncertain thought it had, the mirror world trembled, reflections pressing their palms against the surfaces, whispering urgently, warning it without words that the balance was shifting. And I realized this was how it always ended. Not with a sudden escape, but with a slow reversal, a patient erosion of certainty. And as I focused on that connection, imagining myself solid, real, deserving of my own life, the mirrors around me began to cloud, the endless corridors shrinking, collapsing inward, and the reflections started to scream not in pain, but in fear, because fear here was contagious, and it was no longer mine. And somewhere out there, the thing lifted its head and stared into the mirror in front of it, seeing not its own confident smile, but my eyes staring back, calm, waiting, moving just a little on their own. And when it saw my eyes moving without its permission, the thing's breath hitched, a sharp, panicked sound that echoed through both worlds at once, and the mirror between us pulsed like a living heart, each beat sending shockwaves through the reflected corridors around me, shattering some mirrors completely, while others cracked and bled black lines down their surfaces. And the reflections began to scatter, their confidence breaking as they realized the attention had shifted, that they were no longer the hunters, but the witnesses. And I felt myself growing heavier, more real with every breath, my feet pressing firmly against the reflective floor as gravity returned to me piece by piece, while on the other side the thing stumbled back from the sink, clutching its head as if memories it had stolen were turning against it, memories of my childhood fears, my regrets, my late-night doubts now screaming inside its skull. And it screamed my voice into the empty bathroom, demanding I stop, demanding I look away, but I didn't. Because I understood now that mirrors are not doors, they are agreements, and I was done agreeing. And as I stepped closer to the mirror from my side, the glass softened again, welcoming me the way it once welcomed it, and I could see terror finally replace that devil's smile, its teeth shrinking, its eyes filling with something almost human, almost desperate, and it pressed its palms against the glass, just like I once had, whispering my name the way I used to whisper for help. And for a brief moment, a dangerous one, I felt pity, because it looked so much like me, and that hesitation sent a tremor through the mirror world, a reminder of how this cycle always tries to save itself. But then I remembered every reflection still trapped behind me, every version that never escaped, and I placed my hand against the glass, feeling its resistance weaken, knowing that when I stepped through this time, only one of us would be allowed to hesitate. And as my palm pressed harder, the mirror screamed, not with sound but with a pressure that rattled my teeth and made the remaining reflections collapse to their knees, covering their ears as if some ancient rule was being broken. And the thing on the other side shook violently, its features glitching between my face and something older, stretched, horned shadows flickering beneath the skin, the devil's smile tearing back open and then snapping shut again as it fought to hold its shape. And it begged then, not with words but with memories, flooding the glass with moments of my life twisted just enough to make me doubt myself, showing me failures I still carried, mistakes I regretted, nights I wished I had been someone else. And for a terrifying second, my hand weakened as those thoughts clawed their way back into my chest. And instantly, the mirror thickened, growing cold and resistant again, the reflections behind me leaning forward eagerly. Sensing weakness like sharks smelling blood, and I realized how precise this place was, how it balanced everything on the smallest emotional shift. And I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, focusing not on who I had been but on the simple, undeniable fact that I was here, aware, resisting, in the moment that certainty returned. The glass thinned again, rippling outward in waves, and the thing screamed my name properly this time, raw and animal, its nails digging into the mirror as cracks raced up its arms, pieces of its borrowed skin flaking off to reveal something dark and glassy underneath, and the bathroom lights above it began to flicker violently, mirrors in that world shattering one by one as its grip on reality weakened. And around me the trapped reflections began to fade, not disappearing but loosening, their outlines blurring as if the spell holding them was finally struggling to maintain itself. And just as I leaned forward, ready to step through, the mirror behind me suddenly tapped softly, once, twice, the same deliberate knock it had used on me that first night, and I felt a presence on my back, a reminder that mirrors always face each other for a reason, that this place never releases without trying one last trick. And I froze, caught between two surfaces, knowing with a sinking certainty that something else was learning how to move on its own, and that soft tapping behind me grew more confident, more arrhythmic, like a heartbeat learning its tempo. And I resisted the urge to turn because I understood now that attention was invitation here. Yet the air itself shifted, carrying a familiar scent of cold glass and metal that told me whatever was behind me already knew my shape. And in the mirror in front of me I saw the thing wearing my face glance past my shoulder, its expression changing from terror to relief, then to something dangerously close to joy, because it wasn't alone anymore. And the surface between us began to thicken again as if responding to that shared recognition, and the reflections that had been fading suddenly snapped back into focus, their smiles returning sharper, hungrier, as whispers flooded the corridor telling me I had waited too long. That certainty decays just like fear if you don't protect it. And the tapping stopped, replaced by the unmistakable sound of slow breathing directly behind my neck, breath that matched my rhythm perfectly. And against my will I saw it in the corner of the glass, a second version of me standing inches away, its movements slightly delayed, its grin unfolding inch by inch into that same devil smile I thought I had cornered. And I felt the horrible truth settle in that this place never relied on a single reflection. It grew backups, contingencies, mirrors behind mirrors, and the thing in front of me straightened its posture again as strength flowed back into it, whispering that the world only needed one of us to doubt for the balance to tip. And as the presence behind me raised its hand, not touching me yet, just hovering close enough to feel the cold, the mirror world trembled into a perfect, suffocating stillness, waiting to see which reflection I would acknowledge first. And in that stillness I made the only choice that felt real, because instead of turning toward either reflection, I closed my eyes completely and stepped forward into the space between them, into the one place this world hated most, uncertainty without fear. And the moment I did, the mirrors erupted around me, glass screaming as if torn apart from the inside. The two versions of me lunging at once, only to collide with each other in a violent blur, their identical faces twisting in rage and shock as they realized neither had been chosen. And the impact sent a shockwave through the reflected corridors, shattering mirror after mirror into falling shards that dissolved before hitting the ground. And I felt myself pulled upward, outward, as if gravity itself had remembered where I belonged, while the reflections clawed at each other desperately, fighting not to escape, but to exist, screaming my name like a curse, like a prayer. And as I rose, I saw the true shape of that place for the first time. Not endless mirrors, but a wound in reality stitched together by attention and self-loathing. A parasite that survived by convincing people their reflections were more honest than they were. And as that realization burned through me, the light returned, blinding and warm, flooding every crack until the mirror world began collapsing in on itself. Reflections freezing mid-scream before turning blank, empty, harmless. And then there was silence again, real silence. This time, followed by the sharp sting of cold tiles against my bare feet as I collapsed forward into my bathroom, gasping for air like I had been underwater too long. The light steady above me, the mirror intact, ordinary. And when I slowly forced myself to look up, my reflection stared back normally, exhausted, terrified, human, no delay, no smile. And for a long moment I stayed there on the floor, laughing and crying at the same time, convinced it was finally over. But weeks passed, and life settled back into something that looked normal from the outside. Friends said I seemed quieter, more focused, like someone who had survived something they didn't talk about. And I avoided mirrors as much as I could, covering the bathroom one at night, shaving by touch, living carefully. Until one evening months later when I caught my reflection accidentally in the dark screen of my phone, and my heart jumped out of habit, but nothing happened. It copied me perfectly, blinked when I blinked, breathed when I breathed, and I allowed myself to relax for the first time, until I noticed something small, something almost harmless. Because when I smiled in relief, my reflection smiled too, but it held the expression just a second longer than I did. Not enough for anyone else to notice, not enough to panic over, just long enough to remind me. And now I understand the truth I wish I had known before, that mirrors don't need permission to watch. Only repetition, only neglect. And every time you stare at yourself too long wondering who you really are, something on the other side leans closer, practicing your face, learning your doubt, waiting patiently for the moment you forget that you are real. Because reflections don't always try to replace you all at once. Sometimes they just wait, smiling softly, until you start acting like one of them.